My dad smashed my head into dinner, and my mom laughed like I finally mattered. Full title line. Dad smashed my head into dinner in front of everyone. Mom laughed, at least now you're worth noticing. Dinner at our house was never peaceful. It was a performance. A stage where my father's temper hovered over every plate like a storm cloud ready to break, and my mother's icy silence made the air heavy. That night the table was crowded. Relatives from out of town. My siblings sitting straighter than usual. My father, at the head knife and fork in hand like a king waiting to be served. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I took my seat. No one spoke much. The clinking of silverware against china was the only sound. Everyone knew that one wrong word could ignite him. That was how we lived, waiting for the explosion. I kept my eyes on my plate, trying to make myself small, invisible. It was safer that way. But invisibility never lasted long in my father's world. His voice cut through the silence. You're not even eating properly. Look at you. Weak. Useless. I froze. My fork trembled in my hand. I wanted to defend myself, but I knew better. Words always made it worse. And then, before I could breathe, his hand shot out. Fingers like iron around the back of my neck. The next moment, my head slammed into the plate. The crack of my forehead against porcelain echoed through the dining room. Food smeared across my cheek. The smell of gravy, potatoes, and humiliation filled my nose. Gasps rose around the table. My siblings' eyes widened. A cousin covered her mouth. The room spun for a moment, my head ringing from the impact. But worse than the pain was the sound that followed. My mother's laugh, sharp, cold, not nervous, not shocked, a real laugh. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on me, and said with a smirk, "At least now you're worth noticing." My heart cracked open right there. I could have handled my father's violence. I'd been handling it for years, but her laughter, her words, that betrayal sliced deeper than any bruise he could leave. I lifted my face, gravy dripping down my chin, and saw the pity in the relatives' eyes, the embarrassment, the awkward shifting in their seats. No one moved to help me. No one told him to stop. In that silence, I realized something. I wasn't just a victim of his rage. I was entertainment for her. A punchline. The sting of mashed potatoes in my hair was nothing compared to the sting of my mother's smile. I wiped my face with a napkin, my hand shaking. My father had already gone back to his meal, chewing as if nothing had happened. My siblings bowed their heads, complicit in their silence. The room moved on, but inside me something cracked wide open. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It wasn't just pain. It was the birth of something stronger. Because in that moment, I knew this couldn't go on. I couldn't keep being the family's scapegoat, the invisible one, until they needed someone to crush. They thought this was just another dinner, just another night. But it wasn't. It was the night I finally saw them for what they really were, and the night I promised myself I'd never forget. But what they didn't know was that moment would become my breaking point. The gravy crusted on my hair washed off in the shower, but the sound of my mother's laughter stayed. It echoed louder than the slam of my father's hand, sharper than the sting of the plate against my skin. Because it wasn't new, it was the same silence, the same rejection I'd known my entire life, just finally spoken aloud. Growing up in that house meant learning early what roles we played. My brother was the golden child, my sister, the favorite shadow who could do no wrong. And me? I was the problem, the scapegoat, the punching bag that made everyone else look better. My father's anger came like storms, sudden, loud, violent. But it was my mother's silence that shaped me, her refusal to defend me, her choice to look away. When I was 7, I came home crying because a group of kids at school had cornered me and shoved me around. I told her I wanted a hug. She folded laundry without looking at me and said, "Maybe if you tried harder to fit in, people wouldn't treat you that way." When I was 10, I brought home a drawing I'd spent hours on. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd put it on the fridge like she did with my sisters. Instead, she glanced once and said, "Don't leave your mess on the table." And when I was 15, after my father had pinned me against the wall for talking back, I begged her, tears streaming down my face, "Why don't you ever stop him?" She just walked past me and muttered, "You should know when to keep quiet." Each memory dug deeper. Each moment proved I wasn't just unloved, I was unwanted. Meanwhile, my siblings were celebrated for everything. My brother scored a single goal at soccer. My parents threw a party. My sister sang at a school talent show. They framed the program. I came home with straight A's. Nothing. Not even a word. I carried the blame for things I didn't do. If my brother broke something, it was somehow my fault for distracting him. If my sister lied, I was the one accused of starting trouble. And each time my mother's eyes landed on me like I was the shame of the family. The dinner table incident didn't just humiliate me, it opened every old wound. It reminded me that no matter how quiet I stayed, no matter how hard I tried, I'd always be the one they shoved into the dirt just to keep their own shoes clean. I began seeing patterns I'd once ignored. How my father's temper seemed almost designed to break me down, while my mother's silence cemented me as the family scapegoat. How my siblings learned to let me take the fall, so their mistakes disappeared. And how my mother, especially, seemed to almost enjoy it. Her laughter at dinner hadn't been an accident. It was confirmation. She'd always known I was the one they'd throw to the wolves, and she'd never stopped it. But late at night, lying awake and replaying every slight, I felt a darker question rising. Why me? Why did her eyes always hold more hate for me than for anyone else? And that question became the whisper I couldn't silence, because soon I would stumble across the answer, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. But then I found out why my mother always despised me more than the others. I never meant to find them. The journals, the letters, they weren't hidden in a safe or locked drawer, just stacked in a box in the attic, alongside dusty Christmas ornaments and yellowed photo albums. It was after another night of my father yelling and my mother pretending she didn't hear. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered the house like a ghost. My feet carried me up to the attic. I told myself I was just looking for old blankets. Instead, I found the truth. The first journal was bound in faded leather, my mother's handwriting instantly recognizable. Neat, sharp, exact. I flipped through the pages, expecting grocery lists or family schedules, but it wasn't that. It was venom. I feel nothing when I look at her. Sometimes I wonder why I didn't leave her at the hospital. She drains me. She reminds me of every mistake I ever made. My breath caught. My throat closed. She was writing about me. I kept reading. She will never be enough. She's weak, pathetic. I should have known she'd turn out this way. Every line stabbed. Every word confirmed what I had felt for years, but never dared to say out loud. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just favoritism. It was resentment, hatred. In another letter, tucked between the pages she'd written to her own sister, she was a burden from the start. I tried, but nothing about her feels like mine. Sometimes I wish she wasn't here at all. I dropped the paper, my hands trembling. It felt like the air had been punched out of me. All those years I thought maybe if I worked harder, if I stayed quieter, if I earned better grades, maybe then she'd see me. Maybe she'd love me. but the truth was there in ink. She had never wanted me. I stormed downstairs, clutching the journals like weapons. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming softly like she had a heart. I slammed the book on the counter. "What is this?" She turned, her expression flat. Not surprised, not guilty, almost bored. "You went through my things," she said. "That's all you care about? I read how you really feel, how you wish you'd left me at the hospital, how I was never enough for you." Her eyes locked on mine, cold and unblinking. "I told the truth in those pages. You were never enough. Not for me, not for this family. You never will be." The words cut deeper than my father's fists ever had, because fists heal. But this was permanent. For a long moment, I stood there, shaking, waiting for something. A flicker of guilt, a hint of love, anything. But she just turned back to the sink, rinsing a plate as if she hadn't just ripped out my heart. That was when the fire lit inside me. Not a fire of desperation anymore. Not of begging to be noticed, but a fire of rage, a fire of clarity. If she would never give me love, then I would stop asking for it. If I couldn't get validation from them, then I would find my own. And if they wanted to keep treating me like a burden, then I would make sure they'd choke on the consequences of their cruelty. If I couldn't get love from them, I'd make sure they'd choke on the consequences of their cruelty. After reading those journals, after hearing my mother admit out loud that I was never enough, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting, stopped hoping, and I started planning. My escape couldn't just be about leaving the house. It had to be permanent, final. The kind of escape where they couldn't drag me back with guilt, manipulation, or blood ties. So I played their game in silence. On the surface, I stayed quiet, going about chores and routines as if nothing had changed. But every night behind closed doors, I was building a new life. I started applying for better jobs in secret. I told my parents I was working late, but really I was interviewing at places far from home. I opened a separate bank account they didn't know about, funneling money from my paychecks into it little by little. I built connections outside their circle, finally letting friends know parts of my story. Some offered support, some offered advice. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. And I documented everything. Every bruise, every scream, every time my father's hand slammed into me or my mother's voice cut me down. I wrote dates, times, exact words. I took photos when I could. I saved voicemails filled with threats, because I wasn't just planning to leave, I was planning to make sure they couldn't hurt me or anyone else again. When my mother noticed the distance, she tried her usual tactics. "You'll regret shutting out your family. Blood is everything." When my father caught me quietly standing up for myself, he leaned close, his breath hot on my face. "You think you're brave now? Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." And my siblings, the ones who had stood by at that dinner, eyes down, saying nothing, called me dramatic. "You exaggerate everything. It wasn't that bad." But I didn't bend this time. I didn't crumble, because I knew what I was building. The final straw came one night when my father exploded again. I don't even remember what set him off. Something small, something stupid. It always was. But this time his rage left a bruise so deep I couldn't hide it. I looked in the mirror the next morning, staring at the mark on my skin, and I knew enough. I walked into the police station with my folder of evidence, photos, recordings, journals, dates, and filed a report. The officer's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "You've been living like this for how long?" "Too long," I whispered. Filing that report was the first time I felt power. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't just a victim, but someone fighting back. The investigation moved faster than I expected. My father was furious when he found out. My mother tried to twist it, telling relatives I was ungrateful, that I was ruining the family. But their words didn't matter anymore, because the law was watching now, because the bruises had voices, because I had proof. And when the court date finally came, I walked into that building with my head high, holding the evidence that carried my truth. The day I walked into court and testified against him, my mother finally looked afraid. Courtrooms are strange places. The air feels both heavy and hollow, like everyone is holding their breath while waiting for truth to claw its way out. That day, I walked in carrying not just evidence, but years of silence, scars, and shadows. My father sat at the defense table, stiff in a suit he didn't deserve to wear. My mother was behind him, lips tight, eyes burning into me like she could will me into silence. My siblings weren't by her side. They were scattered in the benches, avoiding each other's eyes, each one hoping the spotlight would miss them. When the judge called my name, I rose, my knees shaking but my voice steady. I opened the folder and laid it all bare. Photos of bruises, medical records, dates and times scribbled across years of notebooks, audio recordings of his shouting, the slaps, the threats. Even my mother's own handwriting in those journals, proof of her contempt and complicity. The defense tried to twist it, of course. She's exaggerating. These are family matters, misunderstandings. But every time they tried, my lawyer countered with evidence that snapped their arguments in half. And I watched something remarkable happen. For the first time in my life, the power wasn't in his hands. It was in mine. The judge leaned forward, eyes on my father, and read the charges. Assault, domestic abuse, child endangerment. The words were like thunder rolling through the courtroom. My father shifted in his chair, no longer a king at the dinner table, just a man cornered by truth. And my mother? Oh, my mother. She'd spent a lifetime laughing at my pain, mocking me, dismissing me. But when the judge mentioned her name in the context of neglect, of enabling, of complicity, she paled. For the first time, she looked small. My siblings? They scattered like leaves in a storm, pointing fingers at each other. At my parents, at me, anything to avoid the reflection of their own silence, their own cowardice. When the gavel fell, it wasn't just a ruling, it was a rebirth. My father would face real consequences. My mother, her reputation in tatters, could no longer pretend innocence. And me? I walked out of that courtroom carrying nothing of theirs anymore. No guilt, no blame, no ties. I cut them all off, changed my number, packed the last of my things, and I moved into a small apartment I paid for with my own hard-earned money. It wasn't big, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every chair, every plate, every pillow, mine. There were no slammed doors, no cold stares, no footsteps I feared in the hallway. For the first time, silence was safe. For the first time, I could breathe without bracing for impact. I'd been the scapegoat, the ignored child, the one they thought they could crush into nothing. But now I was free, and freedom tasted better than any approval I'd begged for all those years. I didn't just walk away. I ran toward something bigger, myself. And I knew, without question, I would never let them near my life again. In the end, I didn't just survive their cruelty. I built a life they'll never be part of.